let's kick off the integumentary system. So the integumentary system is your skin. It is the skin system, as well as all of the other things that encompass and surround your skin, the accessory things such as hair, sweat glands, etc. Okay? So the skin, it is our largest organ. There are two distinct regions for it, the dermis and epidermis. The epidermis is the on top layer, because epi, we know that. That root means on top or above or up. Okay? Our skin is about 7% of our body weight, so it's not heavy. Considering what your body weighs, just your skin is not an insignificant amount, okay? It varies in thickness, kind of depending on where it is. Like the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet, they have thicker skin than, say, your eyelids. The skin on your eyelids is very, very thin, okay? And then along with our epidermis and our dermis, we have the hypodermis. The hypodermis is also known as the subcutaneous layer. I like to call it the sub-Q layer. That's what they call it in healthcare, okay? The subcutaneous layer is made of mostly loose areolar connective tissue and adipose tissue. It has some parts of the integumentary system, but not all of them. It doesn't have all of the skin's normal properties, but it has most of them. Cool. So this is kind of giving you an overview of the generalized skin structure. Right in here, we have that dermal layer. It's right on top. Epidermal layer. My apologies, my bad. And then your dermis sits right below there. Okay? You got your epidermis, then the dermis, and the hypodermis. Some accessory pieces to the skin are the nervous structures. We'll talk about those when we get into the hair. And the sweat glands. Oops, let's go here. Sweat glands. You've got blood vessels. You've got fat cells. You got all kinds of stuff in your skin. All right? This is looking, again, at kind of a different way of looking at the skin and its layers. This is essentially a cadaver body that kind of got cut so that you can see all the different layers. So you can see your epidermis sitting right here on top, dermis just below there, hypodermis below that. Deep fascia covers the muscles, and then there's the muscle itself. Lots of layers before you get to the muscle. And that's a good thing, so that if and when you fall or you get a cut or something like that, you're not just cutting straight into your muscle, because that would take a lot more time to heal, but it'd be a lot more painful for sure. All right? So, important functions of the skin. The first and most important function is to protect. Your skin's main job is to protect your body from the environment. It protects all of the internal, deeper organs from bacteria, from injury, from abrasion, from UV rays, all of it. Your skin's main job, most important job, is to protect. Okay? It also protects against water loss, and that's really important because your body is made up mostly of water. If you lose too much water, you get dehydrated. When you get too dehydrated, you can go into shock. Okay? Next up, it does a lot of body temperature regulation. It's kind of cold in this classroom. but if you step outside, it's 1,000,000 degrees. Your body needs to be able to regulate its own temperature so that you stay at a general homeostatic normal. That homeostatic normal is generally around 98.6 degrees. When they're saying, oh, your temperature is this, that, or the other, that is your general normal homeostatic temperature. It ranges for different people. Okay? Your skin also does quite a bit of excretion. You don't really think about your skin excreting things, but it does. It secretes lots of things like urea, salt, and water, usually through the way of sweat. Mm-hmm. I believe it is. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Next function of the skin, your skin produces vitamin D. Vitamin D is one of those vital vitamins. That was dumb. Vital vitamins that your body needs in order to form things like bones and in order for you to see. There's a lot of things that need vitamin D. We'll talk about those when we get to vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. Okay? Your skin also does quite a bit of sensory reception. You can feel things through your skin. You can feel things like temperature. You can feel pressure. You can feel pain. Those are all sensory receptors that your skin has and that is needed to keep you safe. If for my long-haired friends, if you've ever felt something crawling up on your skin and you turned and it was your hair, thank your sensory receptors for that. They decided to tell you it was something scary. Well, your brain decided to tell you it was something scary. Your sensory receptors just told you, hey, there's something here. You might want to know about that. Okay? So now we've talked about kind of the functions of the skin. Let's talk about its structure a little bit more. So like we said, the skin is separated into mainly 3 layers: the epidermis, the dermal layer, and you'll find out soon why I'm drawing it like that, and the subcutaneous layer. Right now we're here in the epidermis. The epidermis is comprised of keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. Keratin, as we remember from histology, is a protein. It is a protein that helps to make things waterproof. It helps to protect. It helps to helps give an extra layer of abrasion protection. Okay. So the epidermis, our very top layer of the skin, is comprised of cells that are keratinized. Our epidermis has 4 main cell types. One of those is the keratinocytes. Guess what they make? Keratin. Yeah, they make keratin. Okay, so like I said, keratinocytes make keratin. They're found in the stratum spinosa. We'll talk about kind of the layers of the skin in just a couple of slides here. Great. Okay, melanocytes, they are in the basal layer, and they manufacture and secrete a pigment. That pigment is called melanin. Okay? Cool? Next cell type are these tactile epithelial cells. They are also called Merkel cells. And they attach to the sensory nerve endings. So they kind of pass through that. They're in that bottom layer of the epidermis, right before it gets to the dermis. There are some sensory nerves that hang out in that basal layer. Okay? The last cell type we're going to talk about are these dendritic cells. They're part of the immune system. They help to kind of get rid of waste, kind of get rid of infection. They are your soldiers in the storm. Okay? Cool? Great. So, going back to those keratinocytes, they are the most abundant cell type in the epidermis. Most of the cells are keratinocytes. They produce antibiotics and enzymes to help deter bacteria from getting into your skin. By the time they get to the top layer, the stratium cornea, we'll talk about that in just a second, they are dead, long been dead. They are dead because we know that our epidermis is not vascularized. They lose vascularization in those kind of middle of the layers. Yeah. Because of that, as they rise to the top, they die. They get flatter, they get squishier, and they die. And that's fine. That's good because we have millions and millions and millions of them, and they slough right off. So all those cells that you're sloughing off, they are keratinocytes for the most part. There's probably a couple of other cell types in there, but keratinocytes. Okay? That's a great question. I got a question, why are they produced if they're dead? They were not dead to begin with. They died as they went through and passed through all of the layers of the skin, which is a great segue into layers of the epidermis. There are several of them, okay? This is listing them from base to tip. Okay? So at the bottom of your skin layers, you have the stratum basal. Next up is the stratum spinosum. Then stratum granulosum. Stratum lucidium is special, so it's going to be drawn in purple. This one's special. And then on top there you have your stratum corneum. Oops, sorry. B S G L C. A fun little acronym that you can use to remember the layers of the skin is, I guess it's not an acronym, it's a mnemonic. I love mnemonics, they're fun for me. Just come, let's get sunburnt. A sunburn is a first-degree burn that damages the layers of the epidermis. Epidermis, these are the layers. C, corneum, L, lucidium, G, granulosum, S, spinosum, B, basale. Stratum lucidium, you will only find that in thick skin. What is thick skin, you ask? Thick skin is the skin on the palms of your hands, on the soles of your feet. It is the skin that gets a little bit rougher. It's a little bit tougher. It can handle a little bit more abrasion. It has 5 layers. Thick skin has 5 layers, whereas the rest of your skin only has 4. Okay? Cool? Great. Next. So this is kind of just an image, a histological slide, a micrograph, if you will, of kind of the layers of the skin. So here at the bottom, not the highlighter. Okay, well, it's not going to let me erase that. You know what I mean, though. So this bottom layer here is the stratum basale. It is the deepest layer of the epidermis. Mind you, all of these stratum layers are all epidermis. They're all the topmost layer of the skin, but they have layers within themselves. You with me? Okay. So stratum basale is the most basement type layer, or the most base layer. It is attached to the dermis. You can see the dermis kind of just hanging out right below it. All right. It is a single row of cells that mutate rapidly. They do mitosis constantly. Okay. I'm pretty sure that these slides talk about the layers in more depth, so I'm not going to get too far into it right now. Okay. Stratum spinosum. It's a little bit bigger. A lot bit bigger, actually. Has several layers of keratinocytes held together by desmosomes and some intermediate filaments made of a molecule that we call prekeratin. All right. We can tell that this is thin skin because it is missing the layer of the stratum lucidium. So its next layer is the stratum granulosum, named for its granular appearance. Okay. Has some cells in it called keratinohyaline granules and laminar granules that do different things. And then the stratum corneum is the most top layer of the skin. It's about 20 to 30 layers of packed together, smushed, keratinized dead cells. And in between, kind of here and here, is where the cells die. All right. This is just another image of what I was just discussing. Okay. So, layers of the skin. Let's get into it. Like I said, the stratum basale is the deepest layer of the epidermis. So, in our epidermis, dermis, subq layer, basale is right here. It's right in there. All right. It is attached to the underlying dermis. Its cells actively divide, so they do a lot of mitosis. All right. And they also contain those tactile epithelial cells, or Merkel cells, associated with those sensory nerve endings, as well as melanocytes. Okay? About 10 to 25%, Lord, if it'll let me draw. About 10 to 25% of the cells are melanocytes. They make melanin, and that melanin gets transferred to the keratinocytes, and that's how we get our pigment. So it's actually not the melanocytes that are forming the pigmentation. Well, they are not showing the pigmentation, but they do make the pigmentation. Okay? So makes it, but doesn't show it. Okay? This is thick skin. I don't know why it's showing me thick skin in the middle of this. I would rather move on to the next basal layer. But you can still kind of see that stratum basale right at the bottom here. It's that layer of those dark, dark cells, those dark nuclei. That is your stratum basale. Okay? Sound good? Cool. Next layer is the stratum spinosum. It is named for its spiny appearance. That spiny appearance comes from those keratinocytes. Okay? It is several layers thick, unlike our stratum basale. And it has thick bundles of intermediate filaments. You will find dendritic cells here, along with those keratinocytes. And that helps to kind of protect the deeper layers of the skin. You don't want to get too far deep without having some kind of infectious barrier. All right? They resist tension. This layer resists tension and contains pre-keratin. Eventually it will, later up in those higher layers, you'll get keratin. Okay? These keratinocytes have spine-like extensions. Based on what we can see in our histology slides. Okay? Next on the list, stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum is about 1 to 5 layers. They have keratinocytes, sure, but those keratinocytes contain what we call keratinohyaline granules, and that helps to make that pre-keratin into keratin. As well as those lamellar granules that help waterproof. Okay? It is named the stratum granulosum because of the granular appearance of these cell types. Too far into the stratum granulosum, we are then too far from those capillaries that provide nutrients to the cells. So as they go further and further up the skin, they start to die. They had nutrients when they were needed, when they were in their growing process. They had the nutrients, they had all the things that they needed, but as they travel up and travel through the skin, they die because they get too far from the blood source. Without that blood source, there's no oxygen. Without the oxygen, there's no living. Okay? But that's okay, because those cells don't need to be alive. Honestly, it's probably better that they're gone, so that they don't have to feel every bump and scrape that you scrape your body on. Okay? So above the stratum granulosum, the cells are too far from the dermal capillaries to really receive any nourishment. Next on our list is stratum lucidium. It is clear. It is translucent. It is not easy to see, and it is not everywhere. It only occurs in thick skin. And where is thick skin again? Palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Good. So it has a few layers. Of mostly flat, dead keratinocytes. I don't need to write that. It's already written right there. See what happens when you don't read ahead. Flat, dead keratinocytes. Those keratinocytes are at this point now full of keratin, so they're a little stronger, a little bit more durable, a little bit more able to handle wear and tear. Okay? And then our top layer The stratum corneum, also known as the horny layer, it is a thick layer of dead keratinocytes and plasma membranes, and it protects the skin against abrasion, being poked, being prodded, all of that stuff. Okay, so this is the top layer, and those cells are super, super dead. They've been dead for a couple layers now. Okay, so that is the epidermis. Sure, that's 5 layers. That looks like 5 layers, right? Next, we are moving into the dermis. The dermis. It is the second major region of the skin. Remember, there were 2 major regions that we talked about, the epidermis and the dermis. The dermis is strong, flexible, connective tissue. Because it is connective tissue, what type of cells do we expect to see in the dermis? So because it is essentially connective tissue, most of the cells that you would find in connective tissue, you will also find in the dermis. Okay? The dermis is richly blood supplied. It has lots of blood vessels, lots of nerves, so it is very, very vascularized. And it has 2 main layers. The papillary dermis and the reticular dermis. Okay? Let's talk about the first layer, the papillary dermis. So the papillary dermis is about the top 20% of that dermal layer. And it includes the dermal papillae. The dermal papillae are essentially these finger-like projections that I've kind of been drawing this whole time. Those finger-like projections that help to increase surface area for gas exchange, for nutrients exchange, and for getting rid of waste between kind of that bottom layer of the epidermis and then the top layer of the dermis. Okay? The papillary dermis is also made of areolar connective tissue. And is that a loose or a dense connective tissue? Loose. It is a loose connective tissue. So it allows for quite a bit of movement, quite a bit of water absorption, all of that stuff. Okay? And it has some thin collagen fibers and some elastic fibers. Okay? Those dermal papillae lie on what we call dermal ridges. And those dermal ridges, or epidermal ridges, they're pretty much the same thing, are what make your fingerprints. So if you look at your index finger right now, you can see some like lines, some squiggles, some whoosy whatsits, if you will. Those are formed by those dermal papillae and dermal ridges pushing skin up and down and around in different places. The formation of those dermal papillae is changed a little bit by like oil glands and hair glands and stuff like that. So everyone's fingerprint is going to be different. Even identical twins will have different fingerprints. Okay? They are unique and individual to the person. And then those dermal papillae, those dermal ridges, they help with gripability. So if you've ever like been in the pool for forever and your skin gets all like crinkly and watery, that's actually an evolutionary mechanism to help you grip things while wet. But while dry, you still have that capability to grip things, and that's partly due to those dermal papillae. Does that answer your question? Okay. Cool. So next layer, the reticular dermis. The reticular dermis is the other 80% of the dermal layer. It is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. Dense, irregular. And it has thick layers of interlacing collagen and elastic fibers. Those collagen fibers help to give your skin strength. It helps it, protect against a little bit of pull and stretch and strain, okay? It also creates these cleavage lines. These cleavage lines are the separation between those collagen fiber bundles. That happens kind of all over your skin. If you've ever heard of, like, in surgery, they try to cut on or around they try to cut with the dermal plane. So if your dermal plane looks like this, they will try to cut with the dermal plane because that helps with healing, makes it a little bit easier. If they cut across the dermal plane, that one's a bit harder to heal. And it's because of those cleavage lines that are made by that collagen fiber separation. Okay? Flexure lines are in places where the skin folds a lot. So like when you close your hand or you make a fist, the folds of your skin fold over each other a lot. And those folds are called flexure lines. They're those deeper lines in your hands. You can really see them in my hands. They're pretty prominent. And if I close my hand, they fold directly onto those flexure lines. You with me? Cool. So your reticular dermis has a rich nerve supply as well. This is where most of the nutrients and sensation comes from, is your dermal layer. And they have two vascular plexuses. Plexus is pretty much just where nerve meets target. Okay? The dermal plexus and the subpapillary plexus. The subpapillary plexus is just below your dermal papillae. And it nourishes the dermal layer, the dermal papillae, and the epidermis. The dermal plexus is between the subcutaneous layer and the dermis, and it nourishes the subcutaneous layer and the deeper dermal structures. Okay? The blood vessels, the nerves, play such an important role in temperature regulation. When you are hot, those blood vessels open up so that you can get more blood passing through to cool you down. When you are cold, it constricts. It constricts those blood vessels so it can retain heat, keep some of that heat in. Okay? This is what I was talking about with those cleavage lines. They kind of form all over your body. That's pretty much just where collagen separates. And those flexure lines are also they're basically cleavage lines, but they're deeper, they're more prominent. Okay? When you do surgeries, you want to cut along that dermal plane so that it heals better. They tend to heal better along the dermal plane rather than across it. Right? So, moving on now. We've gone through the epidermis and its 5 layers. We've talked about the dermis and its 2-part layers. And now we have the hypodermis. The hypodermis is technically not a part of the skin. It is its own layer on its own. It is also called the superficial fascia, also called the subcutaneous layer. It has many different names. It is made of areolar and adipose connective tissue, but it is mainly adipose connective tissue. Okay? It helps anchor the skin to the underlying structures and insulate the body via retaining heat. Fat cells are great insulators and they keep you warm. Okay? There are different distributions of that hypodermis in biological males and females. In biological males, you see a lot more of that epidermal distribution. Lord. In the anterior abdomen, gives you a little bit of that beer gut. That's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about that hypodermal distribution. And in biological females, that hypodermis tends to spread first to the thighs and the breasts. Eyes. Okay? Cool? Skin color. So, as I was kind of talking about earlier, melanocytes are cells that produce melanin. Melanin is the pigment that gives us skin color. Melanin can be many different colors, actually. Melanin can be yellowish, can be reddish, it can be black, it can be brown, etc. Okay? That melanin that is created by those melanocytes, let's say this is a melanocyte, it made a bunch of melanin, and it had, my boy, a keratinocyte, remember, because this is, if we're hanging out in our basal layer, basale layer, those melanocytes get transferred to our keratinocytes, and then our keratinocytes are actually what give us that pigment that we see. So while the melanocytes create, they do not show that pigment. It is shown in your keratinocytes. Okay? But going back to those pigments, the 3 pigments that really produce skin color are melanin, keratin, and hemoglobin. Keratin is yellowish orange. You kind of get that from fruits and vegetables. If you've ever chopped up a bunch of carrots, you might notice that your fingers get kind of orange. That's keratin. Okay? Hemoglobin is a protein, technically, but it hangs out in your red blood cells. And because of the translucentness that you get in lighter skinned people, that hemoglobin reflects off of those layers of skin in the epidermis, and that's what gives kind of that rosy tinted color. that you guys see in lighter skinned people. You don't get as much of that reflection in darker skinned people because those darker colors absorb that reflected light. Okay? Cool. So that's how we get those skin color pigments. Nails, you've got them. They're cute. Don't look at my nails right now. They're not cute. Scales are kind of part of the epidermis. Did I say scales? Yo. Nails are scale-like parts of the epidermis. They are made of hard keratin. Hard keratin is what allows for that, like, if you're kind of clacking your nails together like that, allows for that sound. You don't get as much sloughing off of hard keratin. It is more durable than the keratin that you would normally see on on the rest of your body in your epithelial. So nails are hard keratin. Every other epithelial is soft keratin. Okay? So as far as nails go, guys, don't judge my drawing. I'm doing my best. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be sufficient. Oh, no. So your nail has some parts to it. There is a free edge here. You can shape that and make that into whatever you want. If you want it to be a little dagger, you can do that too if you want to. There is the nail plate. The nail plate is kind of this part of it. And then the nail root that sits kind of beneath the skin. There are two kind of main folds that we talk about when we're talking about the skin. And that is where the skin kind of overlaps here. Oh, let's pick a different color. The skin kind of overlaps here and kind of makes that border that you see on your nails. You guys look at your nails. All of those folds that you see that kind of make up the shape of your nail, that's just folded epidermis. Okay? The cuticle part of your nail is also referred to as the aponicum. I think that's how you say that. And that's kind of where the nail plate meets the epidermis. That's just a fancy word for cuticle. Okay? So again, kind of that image. The lunelle is that white part of your nail that you see. And that is where the nail matrix is so thick that you can't see the blood vessels that are below there. Okay? The nail matrix is the part of your nail that is actively growing. Okay? Cool? Cool. Let's real quick run through hair before class ends. So hair is a flexible strand of dead keratinized cells. It is, again, hard keratin, not soft keratin. There are two kind of main parts to a hair. There's the root that is embedded in the skin, and then the shaft that comes out of the skin. The shaft is all the pretty long hair that you see around you. Okay? Your hair has 3 layers to it. There's the medulla, the central core, and the medulla has some large cells, a lot of air space, and is not present in fine hairs. The cortex surrounds that, and the cortex is just several layers of keratinized cells. And then the cuticle is the outermost layer. Let's pick a different color. And it is, despite what my drawing says, a single layer that kind of overlaps like shingle roofs, like roof shingles, shingle roofs. Okay? So you have your medulla. Should probably do that in a different color. The medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. Okay? There's that. You can kind of see it. Sometimes you'll get this muscle called the erector pili muscle that attached directly to the hair root, and that's what causes goosebumps. So when we talk about the hair follicle, we can also kind of talk about it in those concentric circle-like ways. The peripheral connective tissue is the outermost layer. It's the blue part in this image here. It's that outer sheath. The glassy membrane, it's this real thin area right here. I'm actually going to do it in white so you can see it a little bit better. This glassy membrane here kind of acts as a basement membrane for the follicular epithelium. Okay? And then the epithelial root sheath has two parts to it. It has an external root sheath and an internal root sheath. And the external root sheath is a direct continuation of the epidermis, while the internal root sheath is derived from the nail matrix, or from matrix cells. Okay? So kind of getting a better image of what I was kind of talking about in the first slide. Your hair follicle is actually quite large. And we have this portion of it called the bulb that is deep in the dermal layer. The top of that hair sheath, of that hair follicle extends all the way out to the epidermis. And then remember how I was saying kind of those nerves that that help with sensory recepting and all of those things, those hang out right down here, right near the bulb of the hair root. Okay, so these are sensory nerves. Sensory nerves that help you feel things along your hair along the hair follicle. Okay? So this is again kind of that image that I was talking to you about. There's the hair bulb, the root of the hair, right in the bottom here. And this extends out up to the epidermis. Okay? The root of the hair, you can kind of see all of these pieces. It is again that three-layered, that medulla layer, the cortex layer, the cuticle layer. And then that cuticle layer has more outside of it as well. There's layers outside of that cuticle layer, and that's the follicle wall that I was talking about just a few slides back. Okay? So again, another image. This is a more lifelike image of that hair follicle. The walls of the hair follicles are made up of these three. We talked about those a little bit earlier. And then that erector pili muscle is just a bunch of smooth muscle that contracts to help keep you warm. Causes goosebumps. When we talk about hair, there are different types of hair. Vellus hair are body hairs of mainly women, children. They're those really thin hairs. Those thin hairs. Hard to see, etc. The hair on your head is called a terminal hair. Terminal hairs are hair of the scalp, hairs of the axillary and the pubic region after puberty. Those are those like thicker, more coarse hairs. As we age, our hair can thin, and that's where we get things like bald spots. That's where we get like kind of balding, and it can also be genetic. So male pattern baldness is something that is passed down genetically. Okay? Another thing that we have in our skin are glands, one of which are sebaceous glands. These are our oil glands. They produce a substance called sebum. Sebum is an oily substance that comes out of your skin. Okay? These glands are simple alveolar glands, meaning that they are relatively this shaped, because they have usually quite a few ducts leading into a single pore. This is your pore right here. Okay? Our sebaceous glands excrete their contents through holocrine secretion. If you remember from our tissue lecture, holocrine secretion breaks up the entire cell to form the secretion. Okay? So that sebum busts open the whole cell. That's where you get things like whiteheads and blackheads that you can pop, or all those pimple popping videos. They are essentially forcing the sebaceous glands to bust right open. Okay? They're mostly usually associated with a hair follicle, so you usually see a sebaceous gland with a hair follicle, etc. Sebum, its function is to collect dirt and soften and lubricate your hair and skin. If you didn't have that sebum, your skin would be drier than the air is outside now in Riverside. Okay? So we can kind of see this sebaceous gland here right up next to its hair follicle friend. Okay? So there are secretory cells that are in those glands. They push all of their contents, in this case the content is sebum, into the gland and up and out onto the skin surface. Another one of those glands that we talk about in the skin are our sweat glands. Sweat glands, also known as sudoriferous glands. They are widely distributed throughout the body. They are everywhere except for on some parts of the external genitalia and the nipples. You're pretty much going to find a sweat gland everywhere else. Okay? Sweat is essentially just hyperfiltered blood. Okay? So it's 99% water. It has some salts in it. That's why if you don't do that. But like if you happen to, some sweat drips into your mouth or something like that, you'll taste it. It's really salty. Okay? So there's salt and it's mostly water. And it has some traces of some metabolic waste like urea, ammonia, uric acid, and these are things that you'd usually find in urine. but that makes sense because urine is also super filtered blood. Okay? There are two types of sweat glands. There are eccrine sweat glands and apocrine sweat glands. Okay? This is again just kind of an image of what these glands would look like. So if you look here, also fun little thing, what type of cells, what type of tissue and cell type would you find here? Anyways, so you have that duct, that secrete the sweat. Okay? So those sweat glands I was talking about, eccrine sweat glands, these are the most abundant. They are simple, tubular, but they are coiled in nature, so they kind of look, oops, not like that. They're coiled and simple, and by simple, I just mean it has one single opening to a pore. Okay? They are based in the dermis. And they open up to the skin surface. Okay? Apocrine glands, however, are usually only found in the axillary. Your axillary is your armpit, around the anal and genital areas. Okay? And they produce a special kind of sweat. And that special kind of sweat is usually it can be kind of white and viscous. It can also be kind of yellowish in nature, but it secretes a little bit of a fatty substance. That substance is generally odorless, but when it interacts with the bacteria that is on your skin, around your skin, whatever, everywhere, it kind of creates this musky odor. That musky odor that is created is called a pheromone. And pheromones are evolutionarily used to attract a mate. So if we there are actually a couple of videos on YouTube, like if you blinded someone and had them sniff a bunch of shirts that had been worn for forever how long or whatever, there are certain smells that are more attractive to other people, okay? So that's how kind of pheromones play in. They signal a lot about a person's immune system, and when trying to find a mate, it is best to find a mate with an immune system that is incredibly different to yours. That way, the offspring has the best chance of survival. So having pheromones and being attracted to a scent based on a pheromone is an evolutionary mechanism. Okay? Some special types of apocrine glands are these ceruminous and mammary glands. The ceruminous glands make your earwax, and mammary glands make milk. But we'll talk about mammary glands more when we talk about the reproductive system. Okay? So your skin has lots going on with it, lots to do. But what happens when it gets injured? We call those burns. Burns are classified based on their severity. A first-degree burn, if you remember our little acronym for layers of the epidermis, let's get sunburnt. That helps us remember that first-degree burns are only that upper epidermis layer, okay? Second degree burns are the upper part of the dermis as well. This is where you're going to get some of that that blistering, a little bit of scarring when it heals. If you've ever seen like kind of those big old yellow bumps, don't pop it. Let it pop on its own. It has so many necessary fluids for keeping and regenerating that skin. Okay? Third degree burns consume most of the skin. Okay? Most of the layers of the skin through to the epidermis, through the dermis. In some cases, you might even get through to the hypodermis. Okay? Third degree burns are really, really bad. Those burned areas appear white or blackened. They can even look kind of charred. And the way that we determine burns as well as like how much of the skin has been burned is that we break the body into percentages. Okay? So the front half, looking at the front half of your body, if the majority of this anterior trunk was burned, we would say about 18% of the body was burned. Okay? And depending on how thick or how deep that burn goes, if it's first, a second, third degree burn, will kind of inform how much damage has been done. Okay? So the rule of nines is used to estimate the extent of burns. Another thing that can happen with our skin, another way that it can be injured or harmed, is cancer. Skin cancer is essentially just an excess of dividing cells. That's pretty much what all cancers are. Okay? So basal cell carcinoma is the least malignant type of skin cancer, but it is the most common, whereas lighter skinned people, about 30% of them will have some type at some point in their life. Okay? Squamous cell carcinoma is kind of next on our list. It arises from those keratinocytes in the stratum spinosum. So those cells divide too much, do too much mitosis. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because these two cells, the basal layer of the epidermis and the spinosum layer of the epidermis, are where most of those dividing cells reside. Okay? Then melanoma is excess division of melanocytes, and this is the most dangerous type of skin cancer. Melanocytes are hard to identify. They're also difficult to extract because of how deep they are in the skin. Okay? So this is kind of just an image of that. This is that basal cell carcinoma. You can kind of see it there. That squamous cell carcinoma and that melanoma. You can see the darkness of that pigment. That's why it's important for even darker skinned people to also be wearing sunscreen, because damage from those UV rays from the sun can cause those cells to mutate, and that mutation is what will cause that cancer. Okay? So throughout your life, this is kind of in our embryonic phase. As an embryo, the epidermis is derived from the ectoderm. We talked about that a couple chapters back. The dermis and the hypodermis are formed from the mesoderm, and melanocytes are formed from our neural crest cells. As a fetus, the skin is formed after the 4th month or so, and the fetus is covered in these little tiny hairs called lanugo. Those are the really soft little baby hairs that they have when they're fresh off the womb. The fetal sebaceous glands produce the vernix. The vernix is just that like thick, waxy substance that they kind of like wipe off of babies, less and less so these days, from babies. It's that thick, waxy stuff. Okay? As you get older, your skin thins a little bit. It becomes a lot less elastic. If you were not protecting your skin throughout your life, it can start to show some of the harmful effects of those environmental damages. I had a friend whose mom showed me her arms left and right. The left one that she had in the car all this time that was kind of sitting on the window is significantly like more wrinkled. It is more like, it has more freckles, all of this other stuff. So without caring for your skin, without protecting your skin, it will show later on in your life. Okay? Inflammation becomes a lot more common. It's a lot harder to heal your skin, all of that stuff. All right? And that wraps up chapter 5. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a great rest of your day.